We're the Young Indie Chroniclers podcast, and we're producing a new feature-length documentary, George Lucas, The Lost Golden Age.
George Lucas was going to do this Lawrence of Arabia scale epic on a 16-millimeter budget.
You got a chance to have the same adventure making the show as what Indy was doing.
His stuff is really quite political.
You didn't think I was going to run, did you?
I learned that when George says he wants to ultimately change or fix something, that he was going to do it.
We built a Kickstarter campaign to support the film. Late pledges are available now at Kickstarter.com.
Hello there. Welcome to Force Ghost Conversations. This podcast is your home for cozy deep dives into all things Star Wars and Lucasfilm-adjacent properties. This is your host, Anthony King, and each week I will be joined by fans, creators, and believers in the principles from the galaxy far, far away to discuss the thematical elements from our favorite Lucasfilm properties. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. Welcome back to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We have an incredible episode here for you today where we're recapping some of the news that has taken place in the Batu West side of things, right? Disneyland. Of course, Disney, if you hadn't been following along, announced that there's going to be some major changes coming to the timeline and just overall look and feel of Galaxy's Edge on the West Coast. So we're here on this episode here in our main topic discussion to chat with Cassie Tucker. You may know from Marketing Happy Hour podcast. She's also done work with the Discover Universal podcast and just all around wonderful person in this field and big Disney Parks fan too. So just really a pleasure to have her on the show, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation about those changes. Before we get into that though, let's get into some Cloud City gossip here. I know that with all the Lucasfilm changes and the Galaxy's Edge announcements and Maul Shadow Lord coming out, that there's been a lot, but in terms of smaller news that we haven't been able to get a chance to talk about on the show here, I did want to note one news story that came out recently that is basically a collaboration between Star Wars and Mad Cave Studios, where a couple new original graphic novels are coming out in the next fall. And it's going to be two, like I think I mentioned, two new stories. And the first story brings together beloved smugglers and scoundrels following Han Solo and Chewbacca on the hunt for Jabba the Hutt's bounty. And then we return to Tatooine for a new tale of Luke Skywalker and his best friend, Biggs Darklighter, take on the legendary Beggar's Canyon. So the first, as aforementioned, is titled Star Wars, Smugglers, and Scoundrels. The Race for Jabba's Bounty will be written by Cavan Scott with art by Christian Colbert. And this story will arrive on September 15th of this fall, I should say. And the other story, Star Wars Tales from the Outer Rim, The Legend of Beggar's Canyon, will be written by Greg Pak with art by Brent Schoonover. And this will also be available on October 13th, 2026. And of course, you can find both the covers and some just general excerpts from the upcoming tales on StarWars.com right now. So make sure you go check those out. Like I said, they're going to be available for the middle grade reader audience there. So just be aware of that. But nonetheless, probably some excellent stories coming ahead. And I even see Jackson, right, in one of these stories as, let me get that, specifically the Smugglers and Scoundrels, right? I see Greedo, I see Jackson, Boba Fett. So it's a whole hodgepodge of great people, members of the Star Wars community in this one here. So that'll be a lot of fun. These look like they'll be great stories here, and just kind of expanding upon that wonderful myth that is Star Wars and Lucasfilm here. So wanted to flag that one. And that's all the news I had for this week. Of course, this main episode is all about news, and that has come out recently. So that is where we'll tackle a big part of that. But also, let me just say, folks, if you want to continue the conversation with us, there are many ways that you can do so. You can find us on X, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky just by searching Force Ghost Conversations. And we also have other ways you can support the show, and that is through, first off, our Patreon site, which for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to a ton of Force Ghost Conversations goodies. And we also have a TeePublic store where you can wear your Force Ghost conversations, if you will, if that even is a thing. I don't know. You can get a T-shirt with all of our various logos on it. You can get a pillow, a hoodie, sweatshirt. There's a lot of different things. Phone case, right? They continue to add stuff to the T Public site all the time of different merchandise that's available, and it's pretty cool. So go check out T Public, and of course our Patreon. All the links for everything I just noted are in the episode description. So just go to those notes and check it out, and we really appreciate you. With that, let's get into our main conversation here with Cassie Tucker. Stay tuned, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. And you may have heard there's some breaking news in the Star Wars galaxy in the new year. Not only did Kathleen Kennedy step down as the president of Lucasfilm, but we also got, just out of the blue, kind of these Disneyland changes to Galaxy's Edge. And because of the implications of what that all means, and just to kind of maybe process it out loud a little bit here, we had to do an episode about this on the podcast here. So we have a brand new guest actually here on Force Ghost Conversations, and she was the first person I thought of when having this episode here. So truly honored to have her for the first time on the show. We have Cassie Tucker. You may know her from the Discover Universal podcast, as well as Marketing Happy Hour. Cassie, welcome to Force Ghost Conversations, and how are you doing today?
Anthony, thank you so much for having me. I am doing great and so honored to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome, and the pleasure is all ours here. And I want to start with like the origin of your experience at Galaxy's Edge. Now, I believe, if my memory serves correct here, Galaxy's Edge opened slightly earlier in California, in Disneyland, the kind of the episode, the purpose of this episode here, and then it opened a few months later at Walt Disney World. But I think we got over here Rise of the Resistance first comparatively, because they opened earlier during the pandemic for that. But that's different. Whole other aside here. What was your first experience like going to Galaxy's Edge? If you can walk us through kind of those first initial moments. I know you're a big parks fan, so I bet you were probably there pretty early on in those days.
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm a Walt Disney World local, but my first experience with Galaxy's Edge was in California. I happened to be on a trip around the time it opened with my
Nice.
family, so got to experience it out there. And then, of course, when it opened here in Orlando, that was a big deal. But my first experience, I mean, I was amazed. The level of immersion and just things that you can do there in the land. Everything is themed. The food, the experience as you're walking around, the rock work, even just looking at some of the small details like that. It's absolutely incredible. And I'm very excited about the shift, which I know we'll talk about, because I think it just ups the level of immersion as well. But as a Star Wars fan, I grew up watching the films with my family, going to the theaters, etc. And so just being able to experience a Star Wars environment firsthand is such an honor, and still an honor to this day, even though I've been in the lands now many, many times. It never gets old.
It doesn't. It never does. Even as locals, right? But they're pretty regularly, right? And you're still like, wow, I'm in a Star Wars.
Yep.
This is pretty cool. Like you exist in a moment in time and place. And maybe with these changes, so just first off, folks, let's recap some of those changes here as we get into this a bit more here. So if you haven't seen already, Disney formally announced that Galaxy's Edge, for now, over in California, let me just say that this is a big thing to get across here, is that it's only in California right now. Coming in April of 2026, Galaxy's Edge will be expanding its timeline formally to include more Star Wars eras, and particularly probably the original trilogy is the most commonly one going to be addressed there, which will include new character meet and greets from Darth Vader, Leia Organa, Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker on Batuu. And also John Williams' score will be percolating all throughout. So, that's a pretty big change there. And I think that's, the thing was, when Galaxy's Edge first opened up, is that you are in this time and place between episodes 8 and 9. Like, you are this episode kind of 8.5-ish of the sequel trilogy. And that was this big selling point, right? They were marketing those films the time it was coming out. Like, that was the big deal and everything. And now we're over 5 years out since Galaxy's Edge is happening, has been a thing. And now it's looking like, all right, we're transitioning into this next phase here. So you first heard this announcement, Cassie, like what were the thoughts that went through your head here? I'm just curious, because my thoughts might be exactly different. So let's dive into where your head is at.
Yeah, it's so funny. I can't remember which day of the week it was, but I distinctly remember I was in the middle of work and I got a text in a group thread with some of my friends, and
Hmm.
it was the article announcement. And I was so ecstatic. I think just from, again, being a Star Wars fan, loving the original trilogy, seeing that these films were going to come to life in this land that, in my opinion, should have happened in the first place.
Okay.
I was very stoked. So, I understand the idea of Batu and kind of having this new experience for fans, being
Hmm.
able to kind of create your own journey. But I also love this idea of allowing us to step into an experience that we've seen on film and see these characters that we know and love. I think that's such a exciting opportunity, and I'm glad that they're finally doing that for us.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting because some of the changes of announced so far, right? I've mentioned the character meet and greets. They're kind of changing up Oga's to be slightly more period piece for the original trilogy, and some of the outposts, the stores, if you will, folks, are getting a little bit of a makeover to adjust for being in this original trilogy timeline. But Rise of the Resistance is largely staying the same in that area, but also this kind of coincides with a little bit of the Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run ride being slightly changed as well to be in this Mandalorian and Grogu overlay, which seems like, at least in California, it's going to always be that way henceforth
Hmm.
forward. Which, you know, this I think I you were very much optimistic about this, and the part that I had was like, okay, the change is okay, change is good.
Yeah.
Disneyland is never finished. As I look right up at like the sign that you walk into in my office here when you go into Disneyland, like the "Here you leave today" kind of
Yep.
thing. So I'm like, okay, things are okay. As like, I'm thinking like dinosaur closes like next week and whatnot. I'm like, oh,
I know. I can't
my
talk
heart
about
breaks for
that
all this stuff.
right
But this is it. I think exactly what you said there is right. Right, like it's wild that Disney didn't do this from the start, and particularly in both parks. But we can talk about the Florida one in a second here. So it's really interesting that it's taken this long, perhaps some might say, to kind of turn Batu into this Star Wars land. I think that many people have always envisioned it from the start, and perhaps the Imagineers and whatnot were like so innovative in the fact that what they were doing just might have went over the head of the average person going to Disneyland on a regular basis, right? Or just the average tourist going there, except for those really hardcore Star Wars fans that are reading all of the books and the comics and the sort of media
Yep.
that are related to this here. So I had to do some like internal processing. And then the thing that really helped me come to a point here that of acceptance, if you will, the 5 stages of grief that got me to this point, is that we have over here in Florida, the Star Tours experience is kind of like a Star Wars land in many
Yeah.
ways, right? That's where all eras and pieces of the Star Wars galaxy unite in one point in time, and they never I mean, they overlap, but it doesn't matter, right? It's a celebratory space of Star Wars. You're walking into Endor as soon as you get there, and you see Star Destroyers and whatnot. And when you ride the ride, there's so many different permutations and combinations of what can come out on the other end that you're like, okay, great. This is cool. I'll get Hoth in one sequence and then the pod race in the next one. All that comes into play, and then you'll get like a message from like Ahsoka Tano in it too, and you're like, great, this is awesome. What a wonderful way to celebrate Star Wars. But in California, they don't really get that at their Star Tours. Their Star Tours is kind of just in Tomorrowland, and it's just a building that exists. That is where Star Tours is held. So their Star Wars landish, right, if you will, is Galaxy's Edge. And as time moves on, it's okay to adjust and adapt to that. And they've already done that over the last couple of years with adding the Mandalorian to it, and then Ahsoka, and then Sabine, and other character meet and greets that have walked around Boba Fett too. So this is just that next evolution of this in my mind, and I think this can only go forward in such a unique way. And I'm curious in your thoughts. Like, there seems to be a lot of positivity surrounding this for particularly the California side of things. Do you think this is a sign of the future? Right? Is this maybe a test case that we'll see if this works out well over here, and we'll bring it over to Florida eventually, or is this kind of going to be a case of they get Haunted Mansion overlay because it's a locals park, and we don't want people in Florida to miss out on getting a Haunted Mansion experience if this is the first and only time they ever come for a week's vacation to the Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, so that's definitely a factor. Demographics are very different. For example, you may have a lot of families that come to Walt Disney World who don't really know Star Wars. I
Mhm.
would be curious of the stats too, even for these younger generations, of how many young children are exposed to Star Wars at a young age now versus, my generation, for example. So that
Yeah.
could be a different aspect as well. They want to make sure that things are appealing to the younger generation, especially families coming in from out of town, that just goes to show you with the Zootopia overlay now at the Tree of Life and other
Yeah.
additions that they're doing now, Encanto at Animal Kingdom, which is coming soon, things like that. And so I think there is a little bit of a different decision making factor here at Walt Disney World as there is at Disneyland. The other thing that I know is a big factor, and my friends and I joke about this all the time, of just the entertainment experiences at Disneyland
Mhm.
versus Walt Disney World, and how much elevated they are
Yeah.
over in
Yeah.
Disneyland, how much more experiences there are. And I think especially one factor that we have to remember with the walk around characters, for example,
Mhm.
is there's a little bit of a different activity slash the way that guests are engaging with characters at
Yeah.
Disneyland is a little bit different than Walt Disney World.
Right.
And you can see that firsthand. I mean, I went over to Disneyland in July and I was amazed to see how guests were interacting so calmly and so, they were so chill when Din Djarin walked out and Ahsoka
Mm.
Tano and Luke Skywalker. If that happened at Walt Disney World, it would be a little bit of a different reaction,
It's a
I
bit more
think. So,
chaotic.
yes, a little bit more chaotic because again, Disneyland is a locals park. People are used to seeing characters just walking around
Mhm.
and engaging with guests. Walt Disney World people, yes, there are locals. However, it is more of a tourism park, right? So people
Right.
are coming in from all different areas of the country. Maybe I've never been there before. They see a character walking around, they get very excited, and who knows what happens, right? So it's also a safety thing. COVID also was
Mm.
a piece there where they drew back from a lot of those experiences at Walt Disney World. So I don't know if that's a factor. We still get that at Walt Disney World. It's just not as elevated and not as much. So we'll see. I really hope there are a lot of cases too where Disneyland is a test case for
Mhm.
experiences at Walt Disney World. I believe, for example, Din Djarin was a walk around
Yes.
character at Disneyland before he was at Walt Disney World. And so we've seen these things being rolled out coast to coast. And so I am very hopeful that that is the case. And so we'll see. I'm really rooting for it, but worst case scenario, I just have to go to Disneyland more often to experience all of these things.
Yeah, it's never, oh, you're pulling my arm to make me go out to California and whatnot.
Never.
And especially with, like, I don't know if you go to D23 or just to being around the area for that kind of thing, right? That's an every other year kind of experience. So for a lot of us, especially in the content creation space, it's a reason to go out there every other year. And, while you're there, you might as well trek across the street from the convention center and stop into Disneyland and California Adventure and see what other cool things are. So it's also like why I'm okay that they're separate things, because they also have like other they get very lucky with like the different types of food that comes to Galaxy's Edge too. Like I'm seeing all the time, like, oh, pink milk is now a thing over there. I'm like, oh, well, I would love to try pink milk. When's that coming over to Florida? Never. Okay,
Yep.
well,
Yeah.
I guess there's a reason to go out there then. Or even the fireworks showcase, right? Because you can actually see fireworks from Galaxy's Edge if you're in that spot when they go off, and they have their own show at the same time too there. So at least since I would say maybe 2023, at least with the introduction of Din Djarin and Grogu in the park, Disneyland has definitely been the forerunner of, hey, let's try these all kind of different and wacky and wild new experiences here. So they've already been messing with the timeline, so to speak, of
Yeah.
Galaxy's Edge for a long time. So that's where I'm like, okay, yeah, it's a no-brainer for them to kind of do this type of thing. And then I'm more of, I guess, because I'm just so protective of the sequel trilogy, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of negativity out there in the space, and I feel like there's like a subset of the Star Wars fandom. I wouldn't even say fandom at this point, just people online that are aggressively putting out this hate campaign. They're like, "Up, see, told you, they're erasing the sequel trilogy. It didn't happen." They're just they're correcting an issue here. Disney's finally learning the error of their ways, if, as some might say, and then now they're getting to experience all these characters again. But I think that this offers up a lot of new avenues by which they can continue to expand. And as Star Wars grows and expands too, right? Will they forever be in the original trilogy? Maybe not. Maybe this is just an overlay for a couple of years. And then maybe, Lord willing, in like 5 years or so, we get the prequel trilogy overlay of Batu and Galaxy's Edge. And you see Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi walking around and Padme and whatnot. And then whatever movies that they might be doing in 5-10 years time, right? Maybe that will get its own overlay. So like it makes Batu this really important hub of the galaxy that they've always said it has been, and have been kind of creating this canon throughout all of Star Wars to meet with that too, which I think has been great, because I've seen in the week since that they've announced a couple of comics and tie-in stories that will explain why Luke is on Batu at this time, why Han is there, and what stories do they have that makes it relevant for them to be there, which I think will be really cool. And just the aside here that I'm curious about, like your thoughts, because I know that for Florida, in addition to everything that you said there too, the Star Cruiser was such an important element to why they were stuck in a time and place there. Now we even have Din Djarin now at this point, but because if you were on your excursion, right, to Batu from the Star Cruiser, right, you are in episode 8.5 when you're there, and you can't, like, it's such an immersive experience that you can't be taken out of it. Or like that's the point, is like you are not to be taken out of that, because that's what you paid for, is the immersion. With the Star Cruiser, unfortunately, rest in peace, gone, does that open up the avenues by which it will open the floodgates eventually to allow more of these experiences, just more at a piecemeal space? I think you kind of concur with that too.
Yeah, no, I that's actually a really good point. I think the interesting thing with Batu as well is it almost looks general enough to where it can serve as that blank canvas for a number of different storylines. And
Yeah.
so I absolutely think so. I think if it's now not part of some sort of journey or mission that visitors to the Galactic Star Cruiser are on, I think they can absolutely open that up to guests. And I'm hopeful for that too. And one thing too, Anthony, that I was just thinking of, just maybe could be a factor here,
Yeah.
is Disneyland is going through a lot of changes with,
Sure.
DCA is going through a lot of adaptions, and things are closing, and they're working on new builds. And so I wonder too if this is partially a play to get more guests to the parks while those changes are happening.
Yeah.
That can also be seen with all of these events that they're doing, the different themed nights as well. And so I'm really curious if the early activation of this new change over at Disneyland is for that purpose too. But still hopeful to see it at Walt Disney World. But yeah, absolutely. I think Galactic Star Cruiser is opening the door to a lot of interesting changes that could happen at Walt Disney World with that land. And I'm hopeful that, again, it'll happen.
Yeah, I think it'll be cool. I'm not. Let me just say, folks, I'm not against like a Luke Skywalker appearing and walking around there. I'm just protective. I still want to have Rey and Vi Marati and everybody else walking around at the same time too. Like I am well enough and as a fan that like I can understand that multiple characters can exist at different timelines in the same place. Like that's totally cool and whatnot. But I guess like my question that I lead to is Rise of the Resistance safe? Like we know they're getting an overlay at both parks for the Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, kind of in collaboration and coordination with the release of Mandalorian and Grogu, the film. But Rise of the Resistance is a very much this is a immersive moment in episode 8.5 here that tells a story that leads directly into Rise of Skywalker that has implications for that. Do you think maybe that overlay is on the table maybe in the next 10 years?
I it's interesting. Part of me would want to say no, that's kind of a preserved experience, that going into Rise of the Resistance, that is the timeline that you are going to partake in, and then you can go over to Star Tours and see kind of a mix, and then Smuggler's Run is a different iteration. I don't know. I think that would be a very costly update. I think, I
They can
love
barely
our Imagineers.
cannons running.
I love our Imagineers. However, half the time I go in there are several things that are not working. Kylo Ren being one of them. It's so
Yes.
funny.
It'll be in
I
like a C
rode.
mode, not even a B mode.
Yes. Oh man, don't even get me started. I was riding, man, this was probably early January. My friends and I went on the attraction and he was working and we all just
Mhm.
started clapping. And the people around us are like, what is going
is
on? And we're like,
happening?
you
Yeah.
don't understand how monumental this is.
It's a big deal.
Yes. So that is one thing. I think it could happen. I'd be curious what they would do. I think maybe it could be an environment change here and there. They also have a lot of screen effects that they can maybe include in some of those changes. However, I do think budget-wise / staying on top of the work-wise, that would need to be under control before they decide to do that, I think.
Yeah, get the cannons up and working again
Yes,
regularly.
please.
Like that's my biggest like holy grail every time I go there. And like when we bring people to the parks, I'm like, hey, did you know these cannons used to like move? And like that's why you stopping and
Once
going.
upon a time. Yep. Once upon a time.
So
But that's why you go to, I'm sorry, I was just going to
Oh,
say
yeah.
that's why you go to Disneyland too, because you get the full experience that it's mostly working all the time.
At least right
So,
now it's working.
At least right now. Yep.
Get on a plane and get out there. It might not be at this point in time, but at least as of like yesterday, it was.
Exactly.
Always in motion, the future is, as Yoda says. But I'm curious, like, John Williams actually created a full symphonic suite for Galaxy's Edge, and you can hear it primarily most frequently when you're riding Rise of the Resistance and whatnot. But now with this change, they're actually moving towards the more traditional Star Wars score being played throughout the park, and also I believe in Oga's Cantina you'll also hear some remixed versions of that for the club kind of scene. What do you think about that? Like, is that like a wow, this is going to be awesome? I'm going to fully feel like I'm in a Star Wars now.
Yes, this was honestly the characters are exciting, and I'm excited about some of those changes as well as the others. But this to me is probably my most anticipated update. And let me preface, like some of these changes happening to the parks, I have some gripes with.
Okay.
I'm not always fully on board, and I understand a lot of it is a budget change, or they see more ROI on a certain story being portrayed. I totally understand that. However, these changes I'm all on board with. I know that a lot of the fans who are really tied into that nostalgia of Star Wars are going to be very excited about this. I hate to make this comparison. However, you go to Universal Studios and you walk into Hogsmeade or Diagon Alley and you see the environments that you see in the movies. You hear the music that you hear in the movies, and that really creates that connection with the guest. And so I think this is Disney's almost comparison to that.
I mean, it is.
And it is. Yeah. And I think that fans are really going to react well to this. You're going to step into that land and just have a smile on your face because you're hearing the score, you're seeing the characters walk around that you know and love. And I think this is just a full tap on nostalgia, which I think we need some more of at the parks from time to time. So I'm personally very excited about this.
Okay, great. Now, you did mention you have some gripes. I'm curious. Do you have any about this? I mean, feel free to lay it on the table here.
This isn't a gripe. This is more of a concern / I'm curious how they'll do this, and I'm curious your thoughts too.
Okay.
So some of the characters that they're going to have
Mhm.
walking around here in the land are from different timelines. We have Rey 1 second, and then Leia Organa is also going to be walking around. So I'm curious, will they allow them to be out at the same time? / if they are, that's totally fine if they're in different areas, but will they interact at all? I'm very curious about this. And the reason I
Yeah.
ask is because I don't know if you remember, I think this was Star Wars night or something last year, but I don't know if you know what I'm about to say, but Anakin from one of the films was interacting with Queen Amidala from another film. So
Got it.
completely different timelines essentially, but they were chatting and interacting for guests, and a lot of people were not happy about that. I thought it was funny. I don't think it's a major problem by any means.
Yeah.
I think it kind of works, guests get it, etc. However, I know the really, true to the book fans, people who are very on top of making sure that characters aren't interacting that shouldn't. I think that's going to be an interesting factor here. However, as you mentioned, we do have some of those comics coming out that I think they're collaborating with Marvel Comics to
Yes.
develop, but maybe that will answer some of those interactions. However, at the same time, I'm like, unless you unveil a Star Wars multiverse, I'm not sure how, some of these characters would interact. So
Right.
we'll
And
see.
and may they never create a Star Wars multiverse.
Yes,
We have enough
please.
of that. Just
We're
one
good.
one
Yeah.
timeline's good enough. It's hard enough to keep track of everything.
Yes.
I look, my hope is that they never keep these eras kind of separate, and I
Mhm.
feel like with scheduling there's a way to make that happen, and just like the location, right? Because I think Rey is going to be sequestered to the Rise of the Resistance area, and like your Han, your Luke's, your Leia's are going to be around the Falcon. So like
Yep.
theoretically, geographic speaking, they should be separate from each other. And if they're smart with like the scheduling and like who's going out at different times and whatnot, that they shouldn't overlap, right? It would make
Yeah.
sense, but people are humans and mistakes get made, and they turn a corner and they see somebody or something happens, they get bored, right? Like it's a slow day at the park and they just happen to wander into a certain area and stumble upon, oh look, it's the Mandalorian, and now Han has an interaction with the Mandalorian there. Like it happened again, like you said. I think people are able to like take the make the logical leap of like, this happens, right? And they just got to see gold there, right? They got that once in a lifetime experience of, hey,
Yes.
what would these characters do if they interacted, right?
Yeah.
They're getting like these huge Bible-esque things for these people portraying these characters are like, what happens if and when this happens? Like, what do you do? They have all that down to a T of like, what's the script that they have to learn. So hopefully they're prepared for it, but ultimately I hope that it doesn't come up, and if it does, then they're in the headspace that they're like, we're good to go here.
Yeah, someone's gonna go viral on social media capturing that. That's for sure. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that. I think there's a lot of overall opportunity with some of these characters being portrayed, and I also the other factor that's interesting to me as well is I believe Kylo Ren is being moved over to Tomorrowland to do his
Yes.
meet and greet, so
Yep.
he will no longer be in that land, which I know some fans are not super pleased with. But I love Darth Vader. I will say Darth Vader being present in the land is one of
Mhm.
my key most anticipated character announcements here for
Agree.
this land, and I'm hopeful. Again, I would love to see him walking around at in Walt Disney World, especially because Launch Bay has now
Yep.
closed, so
Now
we
that
no
that's
longer
gone.
get an interaction with him, which was a big bummer. So I'm hopeful for that reason too, that
At
we'll
the
get
very
him
least,
over
bring them
here.
over to Star Tours. They have that whole pavilion
Yes,
area that like never gets used anymore.
I know,
And
I
we could just set
know.
them up there, and it brings people over to Star Tours, which is the great moniker of, is the park busy today if it's over a 5-minute wait?
Right. Right, exactly. I mean, I would just say full on bring back the whole Jedi training experience that they
I
used
think
to
they
do
should
there
too.
back in the day, but I mean, why not? You have the
Star Wars
stage
weekends
there.
too while we're at it.
Oh, please. One can wish that that
Like if
would
they
be
Star
great.
Wars night, at least give us a weekend over here.
I
Throw us a
know.
bone. Come on.
I know. I know. I have a long wish list when it comes to Star Wars, so that's definitely on there.
Well, this has been a fantastic look. I feel more confident and pleased with this change as we processed it out loud here, Cassie. And it's been truly a pleasure having you on the show here to chat about these upcoming changes to Disneyland. Folks, if you still want to go to Galaxy's Edge to experience it in its, I guess, purest form, I mean, we've already talked. They've like done some changes already. Like you can still like stumble into Ahsoka while you're there, and she's not a part of the sequel trilogy. So like it as best as you can before they formally say, hey, we're no longer acknowledging some of those parts of canon when these characters are out. Like, go experience it. You have until April 29th to do so. But Cassie, you've done a lot of cool stuff for the last couple of weeks here. Where can the folks find you and all the cool stuff that you're doing online through your various podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Instagram at Cassie Joy Tucker. That's where most of my theme park adventures are found. And then, yeah, podcast is Marketing Happy Hour, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. That's a favorite platform, Cassie Tucker there.
Wonderful, wonderful. And folks, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. We'll be back same time next week with a brand new episode talking about something in the Star Wars and Lucasfilm-adjacent galaxy. And until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.
Thank you.